Welcome back, folks. Next up, we have What is the Value of an Esports Legacy? Presented by Dr. David Cumming from University of Arts London and Dr. Joshua Jarrett from University of Staffordshire. If you guys are both on the call, feel free to take it away.
Hi, folks. Yeah, can you hear me okay? Is that okay on your end?
Yep,
hopefully you can hear me. Brilliant. Yeah, thanks so much, Phil, and everybody. Yeah, just a shout out before we start. I mean, the presentations so far have been fantastic. So I think sometimes when you're sort of sitting in a Twitch chat and things, it's difficult to see the reaction, but stuff around inclusivity and authenticity and coaching and education has been so insightful. So thank you. But yeah, I'll kick off what we're going to do today. So what David and I are looking at today is this notion of legacy and exactly what the value of legacy is in esports, which is a slightly new kind of research area, but one we're hoping to sort of open some interesting questions into. So I'll kick us off. So what we're aiming to do today is really ask exactly what the notion of legacy means. The notion of legacy has a lot of background in sports studies. There's a lot of work that's been done around this term, particularly in relation to kind of urban development and legacy around large events. So we're going to kind of be touching on that and trying to think about how esports kind of compares and contrasts with that, specifically with regards to kind of the geographic implications of how esports exists and how sometimes it doesn't really map onto the same sort of types of urban development when it comes to legacy. And then we'd like to kind of move the discussion on really towards a recent case study, which is Riot Games and their use of kind of this new kind of legacy building endeavor, what they've called kind of the Hall of Legends. And we're going to be thinking about that specifically through kind of fashion systems and how kind of this new model of monetization and kind of mode of legacy building has been enabled by fashion systems. And then finally, we want to kind of think about exactly what the value then of a legacy is to an esport and specifically how it kind of creates barriers. It creates barriers to different games maybe trying to enter the space. So to kick us off then properly, this notion of legacy then in sports studies is quite well explored. There's a lot of papers around this area, and as I think Thompson and Tell point out, it's an area that's grown exponentially since the early 2000s. Lots of this work really is around kind of notions of urban development, exactly what the legacy of an event is when it kind of ends. There's this really nice passage from the start of this whole handbook, the Routledge Handbook on Sport and Legacy, which just points this out. What remains of a great spectacle after the last race is run or the final match is played? How can the vast expense of mounting such events be justified? What if there's nothing left behind, or even worse, what if the legacy is negative, costly, underused facilities, or a debt-ridden host city? So these are the kinds of works which have come out really around legacy in kind of sports studies or kind of sport management studies. And just identifying then some of the key themes in this work, it's really about kind of asking questions around the kind of the lasting urban implications of large events. Legacy and the way that legacies are deployed in traditional sports are also absolutely key to bidding processes. So when nation states or governmental bodies are going for those big, large-scale international events, kind of legacy is how you really position that whole bid. But the key thing for researchers is that the way that these legacies unfold and the way that they are delivered on are always inconsistent. They look and feel very different to different publics. And there's a call to researchers in books like this to really develop long-term transdisciplinary research agendas surrounding what the impact of these large events is and really what the legacy is and how we can understand that. And a really useful case study of this is one that anybody in attendance at our conference last year will be familiar with, but I'll just hand it over to David to talk about this for a second.
Sure. So, the case study that we want to talk about here in a bit of detail was the 2012 London Olympics. It's something which is quite close to both Josh's and I's institutions. University of Staffordshire has a satellite campus where conference was last year, in Here East, which is where the it's in the building that used to be the media centre for the Olympics. And then me at the University of the Arts London, we have a new campus in East Bank, which is this little precinct nearby the Olympic Stadium, which is intended to be a sort of revitalisation of a new creative district for the City of London. We've got our university, UCL is nearby as well. There's BBC, Sadler Wells, and then also Victoria and Albert Museum nearby. So there is this footprint that has persisted after the Olympics concluded in 2012, which has continued onwards quite actively into the current day in 2025. And it's largely a supposed legacy of urban renewal. There has been an ambition here to create more opportunities for those who've been underrepresented in the past. Before the Olympics, Stratford, the area in which it took place, was a largely industrial area, very dilapidated, in need, apparently, for a restoration. And part of that legacy is sort of this idea of levelling sporting opportunities for those living in this area. Next slide, please. The extent to which this reality has been realised, it's somewhat mixed. Outwardly, yes, Stratford is very much different to how it was in 2012. It is very much developed and continuing to be developed, but there are very much concerns about gentrification. And even though the event has run smoothly and sort of reasserted London on sort of the global stage, the gentrification has been quite rapid, and the extent to which the benefits of this urban infrastructure is felt and enjoyed by those who it was originally intended for is a bit unclear. So this is typically how legacy is understood within, again, what just described as sort of sports or sports management studies, largely geographic, the built environment kind of stuff being felt by the local environment. Of course, in esports, things are a bit different, and we don't generally see the same extent of consideration for the geographic footprint and the geographic legacy of a major esports event. Instead, as Josh will go into talk about in just a second, it's more inward. It is about the digital legacy of that event within the esports title itself. And I'll hand back to Josh to talk about that in a bit more detail.
Thanks, David. Yeah, so just building on that then. So about this time last year, there was an event that took place. Obviously, the League of Legends Worlds happened in London last year, and it caused a big buzz and lots of comparisons, particularly in London, to events like the one that we just discussed, the Olympics. And one of the kind of ways that this was talked about is at an event at the Fnatic HQ, where the Deputy Mayor of London was in attendance, and they really did talk about this notion of legacy a lot there. It was kind of the big buzzword, really. And a lot of those discussions were surrounding the social and economic forms of legacy, the types of legacy that are prominent in the work I mentioned earlier from sports studies. But the conversation also turned towards in-game legacies, right? Exactly what an in-game legacy is in an esport, and how we can consider this, how this might divert altogether kind of traditional notions of legacy, right? The urban implications of an in-game legacy were just totally unclear, which kind of leads us towards kind of the implications really of this approach, and how, in particular, when we think about legacy in esports, it differs quite drastically than traditional notions of legacy in sports, because we're talking here about a form of legacy that's controlled and curated by the publisher, and all of the potential challenges that come with kind of the executive ownership of publishers. But we're talking specifically then about modes of engagement, in-game engagement and microtransaction sales, right? These are not particularly regionally felt legacies. These are part of really the political economy of publisher control. And that's really where our analysis is heading, and where we're trying to sort of bridge the world between how a legacy is understood in sports studies and how that term is being deployed and how it's being deployed right now in the world of esports. which leads us on to our case study for today, really, which is this Hall of Legends kind of big promotional offer or kind of legacy building endeavor, which has really popped off in the past couple of years in League of Legends. It was founded last year, and it is essentially like a Hall of Fame. It's a way of kind of celebrating and kind of placing really significant players into this kind of status where they're in what's called the Hall of Legends. It was founded last year, and it was founded with the inaugural player Faker, who is obviously kind of, he won a sixth Worlds just the other day. And this year, the Chinese player Uzi was also kind of inducted into the Hall of Legends. And essentially, it's a big Hall of Fame type thing, but it also is accompanied by a series of microtransactions in game. The most expensive microtransactions actually ever seen in League of Legends were approaching something like $500 for the most expensive kind of skins, kind of celebrating these players. So it's a legacy building endeavor, but it is accompanied by a really lucrative mode of skin sale in game. So I've got some pictures, really, just over slides, just talking about what the Hall of Legends kind of looks like. And a lot of these pictures were taken just a few months ago. But if you log into the League of Legends clients, and especially over these months, kind of June, just a few months ago in 2025, this is kind of the thing you're looking at, right? There's a lot of buzz in the game surrounding honoring Uzi, obviously inducted this year. And there's a lot of kind of talk about what his place was, what he did in the game, what his kind of accomplishments were in esports. And there are kind of screens like the one on the right there, which are like the Hall of Memories. And essentially you click on different kind of pictures, you click on different moments, and it takes you through to kind of moments in game, particular kind of historic plays, huge plays that kind of help cement this particular player's legacy. And it really kind of invites you into kind of unlocking these every day, coming back, seeing what the next one is, taking you through to YouTube links to kind of explore the legacy behind these players more and more. And then obviously it's accompanied by all of these microtransactions, right? As I said, these are the most expensive microtransactions ever seen in the history of the game by quite some margin. And we're talking here about kind of essentially skins like the ones on the right there, things that can change the way you look in game. But they're kind of centered around champions that Uzi will be known for playing. And yeah, this is just what it looks like in game when you're buying these skins. It's these kinds of champions that Uzi is kind of known for playing. And yeah, you can see the costs there on the right, which are converted into Riot points, the in-game kind of currency in League of Legends, but it is equivalent to, and it was approaching something like $500, which were the most expensive skins ever seen in the game. And just a further point as well about how kind of, since really the Hall of Legends last year, how widespread this term legacy has become in League of Legends, right? The screen that you see there at the moment is the login screen just a couple of months ago during Worlds for this year. And you can see it's all about kind of earning your legacy. There's a lot of placement on, this is your legacy. And it becomes one of those words, once you're kind of alerted to it and you start thinking through what legacy, how common legacy is and how the term is being deployed, it's being used a lot by Riot Games at the moment in their marketing and in their kind of story building around big competitions like Worlds. And back to David. Oh, David, you're muted at the moment.
Thank you. Old habits die hard. So in thinking about how Riot kind of mobilizes legacy through these mechanisms of the Hall of Legends and through these exceptionally priced skins, it got us thinking in terms of a fashion system in a way. So drawing on notions of how fashion is made relevant and kind of this objective thing that people desire through a network of meaning, of connections and objects, through which things like legacy are leveraged to impart a type of quality onto a an object that is to be worn, in this case within the game as a skin. So we're thinking in terms of how Riot are treating their microtransactions as a fashion commodity, and specifically as a luxury commodity, which are made coveted through their connection and the fostering and the cultivation of this legacy. Next slide, please. So a luxury object has to be a few things in order to justify its status as luxury and to justify its exceptional price. It has to be well constructed on one hand. It has to resonate with the audience who are targeted for it. But on another hand, it has to be authentic. And the legacy which plays into the luxury in this scenario seeks to extend what could be described as a higher order of experience to justify that exceptional price. We see Riot's executive control feature into this model in a way. When fashion systems are sort of observed in more conventional contexts, there are lots of different actors involved, lots of different stakeholders. And while there are a few stakeholders involved in the system that Riot maintains, these are largely Riot themselves and the player base and audience, which they have this type of reciprocal relationship with, which is something that Josh has talked about in previous works. So they have much more of a control over the system, and they have much more of a control over shaping, constructing, and overall testing the limits as to what is acceptable within this reciprocal relationship with players, right? Because they're not just going to get away with anything, but they need to justify what they're doing. Now, of course, Riot have the luxury of having this type of control, and they have the ability and the agility to negotiate and to make changes and to withdraw if something is not necessarily working, which is what we've seen before in the various different forms in which microtransactions operate within League. So there's a testing of boundaries here. These things are not necessarily accepted, but are negotiated between Riot and their player base. Next slide, please. Thank you. So if we could go back one, sorry. So the value of legacy extends beyond a monetary gain for Riot in a way. Sure, Riot is making money off of these microtransactions, but the skins persist in-game, right? They act as a site of memory production in a way that select histories of League are canonized within the game itself. That legacy is preserved in the game, it persists, it becomes something which is seen in what people wear. But in doing so, because it's so tightly controlled by Riot, League becomes its own living record, its own very selective living record of its own histories and legacies. And so Riot have the ability to cultivate, shape this legacy, and then connect it to the microtransactions to justify the exceptional price in this scenario. Next slide, please. And if we think more broadly about this legacy building approach and the specifically selective approach, it sits within Riot's broader transmedia paratextual environment, which again brings forward different moments in League history and affirms them as a type of canon. They are immortalized on the YouTube channel, in-game, wherever Riot has a presence, these things come forward. And so there's something interesting here about how this legacy is not only just contained within games, but also in the broader media environment that the dev, in this case Riot, operates, and how this is actively curated for maximum gains. I'll now pass things back to Josh to finish us off.
Yeah, so just some final thoughts really with the project. We're still kind of early stages. We're thinking for exactly what legacy means, but we've done some work now around the Hall of Legends. I think these are kind of the main themes that are emerging for us, really. What are the key kind of material differences between an esports legacy and a traditional sporting legacy? What is the value of a rich legacy to an esport, more specifically to an esports kind of games as a service model, right? How is it potentially acting as a barrier to new entrants coming in? Because it's very difficult to kind of replicate a history and a legacy behind a game without kind of having one. But also, I think as well, as a final thought, what is the impact of kind of generational fandom on these games, right? This is something esports teams are certainly thinking about, is, you know, how can fandom be passed from one generation to the next? And I feel like esports games are heading in that direction as well. When you start thinking about games like League of Legends celebrating their 15th anniversary for Worlds this year, it's becoming slightly intergenerational, and I think that's obviously a huge part of the aim, but it definitely represents kind of a new chapter potentially in kind of thinking about exactly how these games are deploying notions like legacy. So thank you, folks. Stop sharing.
Hello, I'm back. Ooh, am I? I don't know. There you go. Sorted. So it's nice to be here. I get to finally see David. Hello, David. Miss you a lot.
Hey, Cam.
Me and David used to work together. I don't have any questions in chat, but I have a question myself, because it wouldn't be a broadcast where I get to ask Josh and David a question which goes well off tangent. Without me going down a little bit of a rabbit hole. So my question is, you mentioned legacy quite heavily in terms of the idea within the client aspects of Riot, right? The idea of build your legacy and the sort of brand association thanks to Riot in their IP, and being 15 years on. But I'm going to ask you from a team perspective now, because this goes back to David's word that he brought to last year's ERN about fashion and team apparel, etc. Do you think the impact of teams switching in and out of the league scene or in and out of competition has a direct impact in terms of trying to build that association that we see within traditional sports of legacies of teams? And how would you sort of develop that topic in terms of the impacts in terms of Riot and their stakeholders?
Yeah, so this is actually something that Josh and I was sort of tossing around the other day, actually, about the role that teams and organizations play within sort of these sort of structures of legacy. And we do know that, particularly in the case of League, it's that it is almost entirely, at least Riot at the very least, really channels this into themselves and less so into teams. Like, sure, your major teams, you know, they'll get a piece of the pie, but it seems to largely be, oh my god, I've lost light. But it seems to be largely about League itself as this just objective thing which exists in esports, and then also specific important players, and players will bounce around from team to team. And so perhaps that's a reason why there's a focus more so on players and less so on teams. Josh, I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to add to that while I turn on the lights here.
Probably just a really brief word. Yeah, it's a bit disconcerting. It's become very dark. Yeah, it's just really around Riot's approach, really, and the work we've done around the Hall of Legends, and particularly the value of players like Uzi or Faker. It becomes more, I think, in particular games like League of Legends and any Riot game, because they really have a tight control over their IP, and anything that they sell in the game is usually kind of related to something that they put out, be it KDA or be it something from Arcane, but it's something that they kind of have control over, and that's actually quite different than, say, games like Fortnite or Overwatch, which are a little bit more loose with their IP, let's say.
Yeah, so Gav, I don't know if we actually answered your question, but those are sort of the ideas we've been thinking about in terms of teams and legacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted. I didn't realise David was coming back. So scared that David had turned into a ghost moment for a second. But yeah, I think you're right. With games like League in particular, or any Riot games, they use their own IP more than anything else. So it makes it a little bit difficult when you look at other games such as Fortnite is a great example you highlighted, that they just seem to have any IP that they can get their hands on. I play a lot of Magic the Gathering, which loves doing the same thing. But thank you very much both for your talk. I will be going to a short intermission. David, I hope that you can continue to have light and enjoy the rest of your day, both of you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference. So we'll go to a short little break.